Toast Bites. Chomp.
Hello, friendly gamers! Welcome to Toast Bites Reheated, where I take a look back at some of the best games I've featured in Toast Bites to see where they are now. If you're new here, Toast Bites is a series right here on my channel where I review new and notable indie games that major media outlets don't talk about, or at least didn't talk about before I did. With many of them releasing this year and last, I figured it's time to check in on the top indie titles I've covered, future, present, and past. Since I won't be capturing any gameplay again, all of the footage I'm using for this episode will be from the developers' promos. Let's get into it! My latest episode of Toast Bites 16 was published back in July, so the games I featured aren't out yet, but there are some updates. The whimsical action-adventure Figment Creed Valley has a new demo highlighting one of its many musical boss battles and looks to be on schedule for release early this year. The first Figment game was a critical hit, available on nearly every platform with Xbox One soon to come. Given the high quality and broad appeal of the game, I'm sure its sequel Creed Valley will get the same treatment, so keep it on your radar. Meanwhile, the developer of the clever visual puzzle game MONCAGE paired up with Chinese game publisher XD to bring MONCAGE to mobile and Nintendo Switch. I don't know anything about XD, but they recently partnered with 505 Games to acquire the mobile publishing rights for Terraria, and 505 Games I do know. They've published well-known titles like Death Stranding, Dead by Daylight, Hellblade, Stardew Valley, No Man's Sky, and more. So it looks like MONCAGE may get enough support to gain some traction when it releases. I also have to give a shout to PAPETURA, the adventure game entirely handcrafted from paper, because I'm just happy it exists. The artist put out a video showing how they do it, and I highly recommend watching it if you love paper artwork, origami, and the like. PAPETURA is set to release in May, assuming there aren't any delays, and while they did mention getting a few thousand wishlist ads in their very first month on Steam, I have no idea where they're at now over a year later as far as interest is concerned, but I do hope the game has a massive launch because the effort that's gone into it is just fantastic. Toast Bites 15 featured an odd variety of genres, and the game I look forward to most is Book of Travels. It's a gorgeous hand-painted online multiplayer RPG with some really interesting roleplay mechanics. The developers Might and Delight released their first gameplay video back in December, featuring commentary from their creative director. So if you're interested in learning more about how the game will play, with some behind-the-scenes tidbits about the development process, I'll link to that. Given the engagement on all of their updates and the early success of their Kickstarter campaign, they already have a committed roleplay community. So if you love the idea of a tiny MMORPG with all the loving care and depth of a single-player experience, add Book of Travels to your list. Another gem I covered in that episode is DREAMSCAPER, one of those games I fell in love with instantly. It's a top-down-ish action roguelite set in one world, blended with story elements taking place in another. Considering how much I love the demo, I'm thrilled to see that the game received overwhelmingly positive feedback since it released in early access back in August. In fact, it was the third top-selling early access game on Steam. The developers Afterburner Studios have been actively updating it as well, adding new content and new abilities. It's grown a lot from where it started, and as far as I know, it's still set to release on Nintendo Switch down the line. So congratulations to DREAMSCAPER, and I wish the developers even more success to come. The same can be said for World of Horror, another game I featured in that episode, which has also seen a ton of praise since it released in early access. It's a highly detailed, surprisingly creepy Lovecraftian retro horror RPG that pays homage to the works of the spooky manga legend Junji Ito. If you're not into that one-bit aesthetic, or old-school text-based RPGs, or Japanese-styled horror, you may not be into this game, but if you're into even one of those things, you should try it. With its branching stories and strategic roguelite elements, I especially recommend it to gamers who love a challenge and crave replay value. The developer, Panstaz, if that's how it's pronounced, has been adding fresh content as well, and it will be coming to Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4. Toast Bites 14 highlighted platformers, and my favorite was Pumpkin Jack, a stylish, old-school 3D platformer with a modern flair, which also released to overwhelmingly positive reception back in October on Xbox, Nintendo Switch, Steam, and the Epic Game Store. It's almost like Toast Bites is a good predictor of indie games that'll do well. At any rate, I'm proud of Nicolas Meissonier, the sole developer of Pumpkin Jack, for making such a fun game and adding meaningful updates like seasonal content and localization. Definitely give it a shot if you're here for some nostalgic charm and vibe with the whole spooky anti-hero thing. Another game I featured in that episode was Unbound Worlds Apart, a more atmospheric side-scrolling platformer with fantasy RPG elements woven into it. It isn't slated to release until later this year, so most of what's been happening with it lately seems to be general updates, but you can still download the demo on Steam, with one eventually coming to Nintendo Switch as well. They also did an AMA about the game with PAX Online over the fall, and I'm very interested in seeing how the game fares when it comes out. Toastbites 13 was an interesting mix of games, and the unexpected quest was a highlight I really enjoyed. It's an addicting top-down strategy building and resource management game that released back in November on Steam and last month on Nintendo Switch, and I genuinely don't think it's getting as much attention as it deserves. Maybe the Switch release will help, but I remember that I couldn't stop playing the demo because it's such a polished, well-balanced game with beautiful environments, cute story-based quests, and an innovative blend of items and abilities. It's genuinely great if you like that strategy management loop, so I don't know if the developers just haven't been marketing it that much or what, and I wonder if it would benefit from porting over to mobile, since the style and controls may appeal more to mobile gamers than those who play on consoles and PC. Either way, the feedback they have gotten so far has been good. I just hope to see more success for them as the year goes on. Another game from that episode was ENCODYA, a story-driven pack set in a Blade Runner-esque dystopian future, though the tone can be more humorous than dark. It just released at the end of January, so I'll be revisiting it again later to see the response, especially since point and clicks don't generate quite as much buzz as games of other genres. I hope the reception is positive because Chaos Monger Studio did something really cool with the visual style here and the cooperative elements between the two characters you play as, the little girl and her robot companion. If it looks like something you'd enjoy, why not get in on the ground floor and buy it on Steam today? Toastbites 12 was published back in 2019 with a focus on artsy games, and Luna the Shadow Dust was my favorite. It's a hand-drawn, fully hand-animated pack that kind of blew me away with the cleverness of the puzzles and the beauty of the world they built. No surprise, it released February of last year to very warm reception on Steam, Nintendo Switch, GOG, and the Apple Store, which is great considering Luna the Shadow Dust is Lantern Studios' very first game. They even have adorable merch and an art book you can support on Kickstarter right now, so congrats to the team for all their talent and hard work paying off. Toastbites 11 included Incredible Mandy, an action puzzle platformer that in some ways reminds me of a stripped-down, level-based Breath of the Wild, if Breath of the Wild were just shrines. It can definitely lack the polish of higher-budget games with its sluggish melee combat and some wonky animations, but the boss designs are fun, along with the anime-style cinematics. I'd say it's worth trying the demo at least. Another game from that episode was Lucid Dream, a surreal puzzle pack with creepy but pleasing visuals, though the story was a bit weird. While I wouldn't call either of these games perfect, both released in the fall of 2018 to generally positive praise, albeit not by that many people, which is a shame. Consider this my plea to revive them by giving them a look. Toastbites 10 featured Inked, a story-driven isometric puzzle platformer with beautiful music, unexpected action, and a pen sketch style. It also released in 2018 and received wonderful reviews. Not a lot of people played it, though I am happy that some are still discovering it today, and it's one I would recommend buying for the art style alone if you have a few bucks and don't mind sketchy keyboard controls, pun intended. It's also slated to release on the App Store at the end of this month, so if you're more of a mobile gamer, maybe you should wait until then to check it out. Toastbites 9 featured In Other Waters, one of the most immersive, innovative, story-driven sci-fi games I've ever played, and I remember fearing that it would be overlooked because of its experimental mechanics. So after covering it way back in June of 2018, I'm ecstatic to see that it just released last April to relative success on Steam and Nintendo Switch, where I imagine it shines brightest given the nature of the interface. I really hope more people discover it, so if you like suspenseful sci-fi and want to try something kind of cerebral but still accessible, I can't recommend In Other Waters enough. Kudos to the developer Jump Over the Age for getting the game out. It was worth it, and I hope to see it gain more traction throughout 2021. I also covered Lightfall in this episode, a tiny platformer with a unique traversal mechanic where you build your own platforms as you go. It released around when I covered it in 2018 on Steam and Nintendo Switch with mixed but overall positive reviews. I think its strength is in its design as something visually appealing that casual speedrunners can tackle, like a simplified, lower-budget Ori and the Blind Forest that isn't very challenging and only lasts a couple of hours. Like I've said with a lot of these games, I wish more people played it, but again, I'm just happy Bishop Games got their project out there and did a fairly good job with it, so I wish them bigger and better things to come. Then there was 7 The Day Is Long Gone, a 3D isometric action and stealth RPG developed by Fool's Theory, which if you don't know is a studio formed by developers who've worked on various indie and AAA titles throughout their careers, some very notable like The Witcher 3. They also lend support to other studios in developing their games, like most recently Baldur's Gate 3. I enjoyed what I played of 7 and the world they built, but there were some things that didn't click with me at the time that it's hard to place. I don't know if that's been resolved since it released in 2017, but it has been updated, including hours worth of new content, and people are still playing it. They also have a new game they're developing, and while the only thing I know so far is that it's another RPG, they say it'll be similar in budget and scope to 11-bit Studios' Frostpunk, with 11-bit Studio also set to be the publisher. Given that Frostpunk is easily one of my favorite indie games of all time, I'm very interested in seeing what Fool's Theory is cooking up. Moving on, Toast Bites 8 featured Freedom Planet 2, an old-school Sega-inspired fast-paced action platformer where you play as multiple characters, all with different abilities. If you love Sonic the Hedgehog and want something like it, but even better, you'll probably love this game. I covered it in January of 2018, so I'm a little sad to see that it hasn't come out yet, but the developers Galaxy Trail do appear to still be working on it. They ran a closed beta in March of last year and took part in a live game expo back in September where they streamed some gameplay and took questions about where development is at. So things seem to be trucking along, and I respect them mucho much for the release date being when it's done. Toast Bites 7 was published in December of 2017, and one of my favorite games I included was RAJI and Ancient Epic, which just released this past October on Steam, Xbox One, including Next Gen, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and the Epic Game Store. It's an action-adventure set in ancient India featuring gorgeous artwork that draws from Indian culture and mythology. It has a heartwarming story, and the combat is really fun and challenging as you progress through the levels. It's since been highlighted by everything from Polygon, Kotaku, and Vice to the Washington Post and LA Times, and by all accounts, gamers love it, so it's definitely getting the exposure it's earned. I know I sound like a broken record, but I'm happy RAJI released on a high note, so congratulations to the developer Notting Heads Games for seeing development through. Toast Bites 6 turned out to be a bit of a mixed bag, so I'll skip it. But Toast Bites 5 was published in June of 2017, featuring Distrust. It's a procedurally generated isometric survival game set in the Arctic. I'm glad it's been reviewed relatively well since it released, and that people are still playing it today. Though I'm not shocked that compared to games that have come out since, Distrust can feel repetitive and frustrating to some, especially with its roguelike elements. Another game included in that episode is The Land of Pain, an atmospheric horror game people also seem to still be enjoying, and that apparently has a sequel coming out early this year. The reviews are positive, but they all share a common theme that the game is short at a few hours long and can feel like a walking sim with a lot of backtracking, so for $10, it's up to you if it's worth it. Toast Bites 4 included SHAPIK the Moon Quest, which finally released in April of last year to positive reviews. It's a hand-drawn puzzle adventure game where everything is communicated through images instead of text. It's incredibly short, taking only a couple of hours to beat, but I'm glad the developer delivered something people seem to love. There was also Don't Bite Me Bro, a couch co-op zombie apocalypse base building game. It released in 2018 and it's available on Steam and PlayStation 4 with Xbox One and Nintendo Switch slated to come later. I had fun with it, mainly for the cute Lego-style visuals, and others seem to be enjoying it as well. It's like $1 on Steam, and I think it's free on PlayStation, so if you have friends or siblings who may want to kill some time and some Zambos, I say check it out. In Toast Bites 3, I featured Stories Untold, one of my favorite games I've ever covered. Published by Devolver Digital, it released back in 2017, a critically acclaimed, hard-to-describe experimental game with mechanics and twists I won't spoil if you haven't played it. I'm just glad that it blew up the way it did once it released, because I love the demo so much. If you're down for something different and you've got a few bucks to spare, I highly recommend it.
One day, Station, this will haunt you.
Another game I featured was Jason and the Dead, which apparently died itself. And that's a shame, because it was a really promising, gory, dark-humored, top-down zombie action game with a pretty comic book aesthetic. I was so into it, but the game was shelved when the developer failed to receive enough funding to continue development. It's a reminder that not every project with a beginning has an end, which is why I'm so thrilled that a lot of the indie games I covered years ago did in fact release. I also highlighted Fragments of Euclid in this episode, a game I make reference to often. It's free, and it's only about an hour long, so I'm happy that more people are still playing it, and happy to have used the word happy more times in this video than I have in my life. Kudos to the developer for putting out a game so many people keep discovering or coming back to years later. Toast Bites 2 was a bunch of one-offs not worth revisiting today, so we'll jump to my very first episode of Toast Bites ever, which featured 1979 Revolution, Black Friday, an award-winning, story-driven game based on true events set in Iran in the 1970s. You play as a photojournalist, and the game has a very Telltale/Rockstar sort of vibe, which makes sense considering it was made by Ink Stories, a New York-based studio founded and led by veteran developers of popular franchises like Grand Theft Auto, Max Payne, The Warriors, and more. The game is available on Steam, GOG, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, including Next Gen, and PlayStation 4. It's only a few hours long, but it might be worth buying for the history and style alone. So we've done it! We've taken a look back through the entire history of Toast Bites to see where some of the best games I featured are now, and it feels really good to say that most of the ones I had high hopes for proved me right. As ever, a link to everything is in the description, including some honorary mentions, and all I ask is that you show indie developers your support by checking out their games. If they're on Steam, add them to your wishlist. If they're on Kickstarter and you believe in what they're making and have the money to contribute, back their project. If they're on Itch or GameJolt or IndieDB or anywhere else, download their demos, stream their gameplay, leave them comments, let them know they're seen. Because as cheesy as it sounds, they're the future of the industry, and they deserve recognition and encouragement for the hard work they put into their games, especially if they're good. Even if all you care about are big-budget AAA titles that bring in the money and the clout, at least recognize that all of the people working on those games started somewhere, and that somewhere might very well be a little game like the ones I feature on Toast Bites. That's it for my soapbox and for Reheated. Let me know what you think about these games. Please like the video so it can spread its wings. Subscribe to my channel to put a smile on its face. Do try to be safe and smart this year, and I'll see you on the plate.